In this episode of the Giant Edge Sander build, it's time to get this project completed. We got a few things to wrap up to make this thing functional so that we can put it to work. I'm Jeff, you're watching Home Built Workshop. Make sure you stick around. Welcome back to the workshop, everyone. I hope your day is going awesome. We're back. We're working on the Edge Sander. Today's goal is to get this thing wrapped up. We got a few housekeeping things to take care of, and then we got to tackle probably the bigger project, which is the wiring. I believe first I want to tackle the little housekeeping things, just kind of make this look a little bit neater. And really, a lot of that is just going to be painting a few of the parts that I haven't gotten to painting yet. None of the pieces that I have to paint are really all that big, but the biggest thing is I got to disassemble pretty much everything. I need to take these L brackets that are on the back, need to remove them so that we can paint those, and then the brackets that are down below that are holding the linear rails and a few other bits and pieces. Since you watched me put all this stuff together, you sort of have an idea of how everything goes on there. So I think we're just going to jump right into a time lapse of pulling all this stuff back off. But the only thing that I'm not going to remove is the motor. It's all got to come back apart. After I had all of the pieces removed that need painted, I spent several minutes using a flat disc on my angle grinder, just cleaning up the pieces and removing a little bit of surface rust. And now it's time to start painting parts. Here's a pro tip for you. Make sure you read the color on your can before you start painting. For some reason, I didn't think this color was looking quite right. I just realized what I thought was black paint is not black paint. Guess I gotta go to the store to get the right color. This is dark walnut. That looks better. It's not brown. Well, I have all the parts painted. Let them sit overnight so everything's dry. It's time to get this thing assembled. I'm using this square to make sure that the bottom of the sander is flush with this bracket. I don't want to have any gap there that could cause this thing to rock. Now we'll stand this back up, get it bolted back in place. Make sure everything's lined up before I tighten up these bolts. That looks good. I'll just reinstall the brackets for our linear rails. I think the hard part now, since I've got everything taken apart, is finding all the bolts. There's bolts everywhere. Now I can just reinstall my linear rails. Get those all back in place. I've got a little spacer block underneath here just to give me the height that I need out of that adjustable press clamp. With all the parts painted and now reinstalled, it's time to put our candy cane work table back in place. These little right-angled drill attachments, man, they're so handy. You hardly ever use them, at least I do, but when you have an application where you can use it, they're a lifesaver. Table reinstalled. With the table on, let's see if we're roughly square. I've got it pressed right up against the belt. That looks perfect. We'll check it here on the end. And that is really good. I don't think I could get that a whole lot squarer than it actually is. Wow. While I was doing all of this disassembly, painting, reassembling everything, the 3D printer robot was hard at work in the background printing the electrical box. I think now it's done printing, so let's go grab that electrical box so we can start installing components and getting this thing wired up. And there's our custom 3D printed electrical enclosure. When I modeled up this enclosure, I built in some provisions for some heat set inserts. This is going to allow me to use some 632 screws to attach some of the components as well as the lid. If you do any sort of 3D printing like this and you've never tried heat set inserts, I highly recommend you look into them and consider trying them out in some of your designs. They really make attaching parts super easy. I don't think I could say enough how satisfying it is to spend a little time designing a part on the computer and then 3D printing it and having everything fit. Of course, you have to have all your components so you can take measurements, but I now have a custom 3D printed enclosure. All my components fit in there. And one thing that I would have a very hard time doing, and that's creating a custom faceplate with a different color lettering on here. It looks so cool. I could just switch out to a different filament, prints the letters. It looks awesome. I can't wait to get this thing put together. We'll just install a few of these components here, and then I'll show you basically how this thing's gonna work. Well, that looks super awesome and actually semi-professional, if I do say so myself. This is going to be awesome. Now, I'm not going to do an in-depth kind of tutorial or anything of how I'm wiring this up because, well, there's a ton of different ways you could do that, and everybody has different skill levels and things that they're comfortable with and not comfortable with. So you need to make that decision. Make sure you're doing things safe. Don't electrocute yourself. But here's a general overview of how this is going to be set up. I'm going to have power coming in. It's going to be running through this fuse, then going to this master power switch. Nothing else is going to have power until we hit the master switch. That's going to energize both of these auxiliary switches, which will be connected to some outlets that are going to go in the back here. That way I can run things like lights or whatever else I want to plug into it. From there, I'll have the power right here going from this start-stop switch. That'll turn on the main motor. Really easy paddle you can quickly turn off if you ever need to. And really, that's about it. The other thing that I'm doing a little bit different is I'm using these contact blocks. That way I can connect everything together, and it'll be a little bit neater, I think, than having like wire nuts and stuff, a big glob of wires. Probably a little bit safer as well. I have one for each, the ground, the line, and the neutral, so that way I can keep things separated. Got some inputs coming in here where I'll have some cable clamps to connect the wires going in from the plug and out to the motor. So trying to keep everything nice and neat. And I think it's gonna work great. Of course, we've got the threaded inserts in here so everything attaches nice and clean. This will fit right on here when we're done. All we're missing now really is making up a bunch of connections, a bunch of wires, and getting everything wired up. One of my goals while wiring this entire control panel is to keep everything neat and tidy and also ultimately nice and safe as well. That's one of the reasons I decided to use these terminal blocks instead of wire nuts or some other way to connect the wires. The terminal blocks keep everything neat and organized and really make it quite easy to connect your wires. To add a terminal to the end of each wire, I'm using some heat shrink crimp style connectors. So they just get crimped in place, and then I use my heat gun to melt the heat shrink, which keeps it really nice, and it looks pretty good too. While this is not an overly complicated wiring job, I did take quite a bit of time trying to do everything nice and neat, and eventually we got it done. Well, I think I've got everything wired as much as I can with this box on the bench. We've got the cord coming in, everything's wired. The only thing missing is running the cable in there, connecting the motor. All the functions are verified with a meter. Everything seems to be working the way I expect it to. So let's get this thing installed on the machine, and then we can wire in the motor. One cool thing that I found with the wiring that was already on the motor is that there really is a ground in there. They had just cut it off flush with the end. I don't know why they didn't wire it up with a ground, but all I had to do was strip some wire back. There's the ground wire. I verified in the box for the electric motor that it is connected. I don't know why they didn't use it, but it's there. I didn't have to replace this wire. So now we'll just run this through the strain relief, get it all connected, wired to the switch, ground attached, and we'll be ready to test this out. No sparks. Before I button this up, I'm going around now and just giving everything a final snug. I want to make sure all these connections are tight. I didn't somehow miss something. Loose connection can cause sparks or arcing, cause a fire, or just cause something to not work. So I'm going to take the time to make sure every single thing is tight. I used to work in equipment repair and maintenance for a lot of years, and a lot of times I've seen issues with equipment that really can be traced back to just wires being loose. I even had a piece of machinery catch on fire once because something in there was loose and it was arcing. It wasn't real bad, but the electrical box definitely had flames coming out of it. One of the few times I've ever actually had to use a fire extinguisher. Now I really just need to do a little bit of tidying up, get some of these wires secured. I 3D printed some little cable clamps here I'll use to just tie things up, make sure there's no extra strain on any of the wires. And then we're gonna be ready to power this up. I know we're not at a good angle here where you can really see what I'm doing, but just trying to tie these up as best I can. Now, before we put a fuse in this electrical box and power this thing up, there's one other issue that I want to address. It's completely unrelated to the electrical stuff, but something I want to take care of now. And that issue has to do with this hand crank here. I've found out through trial and error that when you go to adjust this, like if you were operating the machine, This other little nub here tends to hit your wrist, so you kind of got to bend at an awkward angle. It's not a huge deal, but it is kind of strange, and I've noticed already that it's kind of annoying. So I want to do something about that. Looking at this hand crank, I can see that the handle is just held in place with a roll pin. So that gives me an idea. I went into Fusion and designed my own hand wheel with only one little nub and 3D printed it. I think it's going to work awesome. Should just fit right into place. I'm using the original roll pin to secure my new handle. Ah, it fits great. Now I should be able to put this right back into place. And now there's nothing to smack your wrist when you're making adjustments. Super cool. I've designed quite a lot of parts for 3D printing, but for some reason I think this is one of the ones that I'm most happy with. The time has come. We got to test out this control box. We'll stick a fuse in the fuse holder. And now, the moment of truth. As long as we don't get any sparks, when we hit this master power, this should light up. We have a red light. I've taken the probes for my meter and put them in the outlet in the back. We should switch this on and see 120 volts, actually 119.8. That's interesting. So our outlets work. And the moment of truth, we hit the start button. What's going to happen? Will it turn on? Will it blow the fuse? I don't know. Let's find out. How cool is that? It works. No sparks. No fires. Not yet, anyway. We can use the new handle to adjust the tabletop. We're one step closer to wrapping up this edge sander. There's still a few things to do. I need to get the laminate for this tabletop, which is on order. I don't know when it's going to arrive, but it's not here yet. And also I'm working on some sort of a contraption down here at the end that I can use for dust collection. Hopefully in the next episode, I'll have all the materials. We can get that wrapped up. I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I appreciate you taking some time. While you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can subscribe to the channel. Follow along when I release new episodes, which hopefully the next one we'll be wrapping this up. Hope your day is great. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time. Almost, Mr. Sander. You're getting close to being put to work.